It was the perfect day for such a momentous occasion. I was surrounded by friends and family, all reveling in the joy of the celebration. Outside the whirlwind of merriment, curious onlookers either furtively peered at the festive crowd or watched with envious eyes, eager to get a spot on the guest list. At the head of the long table sat my father, Harrison Williams, presiding over the festivities with a proud, beaming smile. He had just finished telling a story that had everyone in stitches. Waiters and waitresses bustled about, diligently fulfilling the various orders of the gathered guests. A waiter deftly placed a rare third glass of Chardonnay in front of my mother, Tracy Williams. She absently ran her fingers along the stem of the glass, exchanged a loving smile with my father, and then turned her attention to me. The look of pride and love in my mother's eyes was a wonderful bonus on this special day. I reflected on the immense love and sacrifice my family had poured into helping me reach this pinnacle. I was on the verge of entering the world I had dreamed of since childhood, a dream that had required significant effort and dedication. Balancing my college classes with a part-time job at the bank, while also making time for my girlfriend, had been a juggling act for 4 long years. I would rush from school to work, and after work, I'd come home to study and discuss my professor's theories with my father, who would counter with his real-life business experience. Navigating conversations with my father about radical changes in business was a delicate endeavor. Harrison Williams' business philosophy could be summed up by the adage, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." Despite this, I occasionally managed to persuade him to try out a new idea. He would authorize a trial run to see if there were any potential benefits. Some of my proposed ideas flopped spectacularly, leading to countless hours of discussion and analysis as we tried to understand why they had failed. Other times, an idea would see moderate success, prompting us to refine it meticulously to maximize profit. And there were occasions when an idea was a smashing success, and I had to stifle the urge to say, "I told you so." I was equally fearless in letting my professors know which ideas held up in the real world and which should be discarded from their ivory tower discussions. Many professors resented the public exposure of their business model's flaws, and my grades sometimes reflected that bias. However, I felt a responsibility to share my experiences with my classmates so they wouldn't repeat the same mistakes when they entered the workforce. Although my ethical stance prevented me from graduating with honors, I still received my degree. This milestone was one of the reasons for today's celebration. Now, armed with a degree in business, I was poised to join my father in running the family bank that had sustained us for 6 generations. And I already had my eye on the girl who I hoped would help me continue the family legacy into the 7th generation. Alina Bachman sat next to me, chatting animatedly with her mother, who was sitting across the table from her. Alina and I had known each other our whole lives. We were classmates all through high school, and we started dating in our senior year. She followed me to community college, and although our time together was limited due to school and work, we maintained our relationship. Weekend dates were rare, but we managed to make it work. I was a typical American male, sometimes tempted to end the relationship when things got tough. But Alina, with her gentle persuasion and comments about wanting to marry a virgin, kept me in line. Now, 5 years into our relationship, the countdown had finally begun. I checked my pants pocket for the 100th time to make sure the diamond engagement ring box was still there. After she accepted my proposal, Alina, her friends, and her family could start planning the wedding. Taking the opportunity to admire Alina, I noted her petite frame, dirty blonde hair, and a figure that reminded me of Jennifer Love Hewitt. Her hazel eyes were captivating, and her seductive thin lips created a smile that could win over any man. Smart, charming, and engaging, Alina was adored by practically the entire town. Of course, some admirers had less honorable intentions, but she was always the object of many fantasies. As I watched Alina laugh at something her mother said, she brushed a strand of hair from her face. I thought about how I would reward her now that I was starting to work for my father and earning a decent paycheck. A trip to Hawaii, a Christmas vacation in London, and a 3-day weekend at the beach were all in my plans for us. We talked about starting a family, and I envisioned having a son and a daughter, as long as they were healthy. I nudged Alina and made a small remark, which earned me a smile and a playful pat on the shoulder. She was deeply engaged in a conversation with her mother, and her carefree attitude slightly concerned me, but I chalked it up to the joy of celebrating our graduation. Soon, I was drawn into a conversation with Alina's father, Mr. Bachman, who wanted to know if I was going with a group of men scheduled to go hunting in Alaska. This elite group included doctors, lawyers, and businessmen, and by inviting me, they made it clear I was expected to join their ranks. Many of these power elites were present at the dinner table today, attending not only out of commercial loyalty, but also because of the high regard they had for the Williams and Bachman families. My father had helped many during his tenure as president of Camden Bank and Trust, and my mother tirelessly worked on community projects. The Bachmans were equally generous, making significant donations to various charitable organizations. Charles Bachman, owner of the family factory, was the wealthiest man in Camden and did all his banking with my father. Now that Alina and I were engaged, our families would unite in a local dynasty, akin to Prince William marrying Kate Middleton. As I gazed adoringly at my bride-to-be, Charles Bachman stood up, raising his glass of wine. The room quieted as everyone turned their attention to him. "I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out today to help us celebrate," he began. "It seems like just yesterday when Alina, Troy, and their classmates started school together. For all the crayon drawings that decorated our refrigerator, the countless hours spent doing homework, and all the school events we attended to cheer you on, Alina, you made your mom and I the happiest and proudest parents when you became an adult. I would like to properly express the love and feelings I have for you, my child." His eyes misted over as he spoke. Alina spontaneously stood up and rushed to her father, hugging him tightly. The audience broke into applause. "I love you and Mommy so much, Daddy," she cried, bringing another round of applause. "Well, baby, let's get to the fun part. As a graduation present, we're giving you a pair of tickets for an all-expenses-paid tour of Europe for the entire summer." Alina squealed with delight, kissing her dad and mom as they handed her a thick envelope. I began to wonder if I could take that much time off work. Even if I couldn't, I knew Alina and her lucky girlfriend would enjoy the trip of a lifetime. It would push back our wedding date, but at least I could save up more money while Alina had her fun. Deciding it was now or never, I stood up and walked over to Alina. I dug into my pocket and pulled out the jewelry box, my heart racing with anticipation. Mr. and Mrs. Bachman graciously stepped back, giving Alina and me the center stage. Alina looked at me, perplexed, as I stood beside her. "I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who came here tonight to help celebrate our graduation from college," I began. And while to Mr. Bachman it may have seemed like yesterday, to me it was like Chinese water torture. This joking remark caused a ripple of laughter in the audience. But the only thing that made it all tolerable was the wonderful woman standing next to me, I continued, glancing lovingly at Alina. "In first grade, we drank milk from the same carton. In sixth grade, we were sent to the principal's office together for passing notes," I added with a raised eyebrow, which elicited another round of laughter. Eventually, I wised up and asked her out on a date at our high school graduation. After that, we both went to college here, and although school and work didn't allow me to see her as often as I would have liked, it made me appreciate her even more. Turning fully to Alina, I looked into her eyes. "And I really appreciate you, Alina. I've known for a long time what you mean to me. I've loved you since first grade. I know what you will mean to me for the rest of my life, because I intend to say, I love you to you for the rest of my life." Dropping to one knee, I presented the box to her and began to open it. Alina's eyes went wide, and she brought her hand up to her open mouth, beginning to show signs of hyperventilation. "Alina Ellen Bachman, will you marry me?" By now, the restaurant was dead silent, and all eyes were focused on the dramatic scene unfolding before them. They held their breath, waiting for what they expected to be a joyful acceptance. But as I looked lovingly at Alina's face, her shock turned to panic. She stared wildly at the table, then at me, back and forth, as if searching for an escape. "Alex!" she suddenly shouted pleadingly and rushed towards the front door. The scraping of a chair being hurriedly removed from the table echoed in the silent room. Disbelieving and shocked onlookers watched as someone ran after Alina. It was Alex Porter, my best friend and the guy I was going to ask to be my best man. The consequences of Alina and Alex's actions reached the consciousness of everyone present, and all attention turned to me, still kneeling and trying to comprehend what was happening. Slowly, I rose from my knee, frantically stuffing the jewelry box back into my pocket. I walked zombie-like toward the back entrance, away from Alina. I didn't look at anyone, blindly navigating the steps leading away from the building. Eyes full of unshed tears saw me off as I passed my car and began the long, hard walk home. I sat at my desk, the rays of the morning sun flooding my office. Turning my chair, I stared sullenly at the empty buildings crumbling in the town square. One of these abandoned buildings was the site of my proposal fiasco. It's been 6 years since my humiliation in front of the whole town. 6 long years of being the butt of jokes all over Washington County. 6 long years of being laughed at behind my back. The restaurant went on. Alina moved on. Alex moved on. The city moved on. The whole damn world moved on. The only one who hadn't moved on was me, chained by legacy and necessity to Camden Bank and Trust. The intercom buzzed. "Troy, Mrs. Fuller is here to see you." I felt a slight annoyance before I said, "Send her in." No sooner had the door opened than I was already up from the table and heading towards her. "Let me take that, Mrs. Fuller," I said, looking with some anxiety at the large box the woman was carrying. "Damn it, Janet, you should have taken it to her," I thought. I glanced at the thin, attractive brunette who was accompanying the infirm old lady. I picked up the box and quickly set it on my desk, then helped Mrs. Fuller into a chair. "How are you, Mrs. Fuller? Is there anything I can do for you?" No, that you don't, child. I just wanted to bring you a jar of heirloom tomatoes from my vegetable garden. I still remember how much you loved them." Despite all the worries, my mood lightened as memories of trips to Mrs. Fuller's garden flooded back. Planting and digging up potatoes, onions, and peanuts. Setting stakes for tomatoes, peas and beansteaks to hold onto. Endless watering of cantaloupes, honeydews, and watermelons. Picking and plucking corn. Climbing apple, peach, and plum trees to harvest. It's amazing that what I now perceive as hard labor was a joy when I was a child. "Maybe civilization has it the other way around," I suggested. "Mrs. Fuller, may I offer you something to drink?" "Well, I won't say no to a glass of lemonade or sweet tea if it's not too much trouble." "Of course not, Miss Temple, if you don't mind." Without noticing Mrs. Fuller, Janet Temple winked at me and said, "Sure thing, Troy." She went off to do her errand, ignoring the barely perceptible look of irritation on my face. I sat down in the chair next to Mrs. Fuller, as befitted her status as a very favorite customer. "Are you sure there's nothing I can do for you today, Mrs. Fuller?" I could see the hesitation. The kind old lady was agonizing over how to solve this dilemma. "Mr. Williams, Troy, Mrs. Fuller. I'll always be Troy to you," I interrupted her gently. The lady smiled, pleased that I recognized her status above mine. "Thank you, Troy. I have this situation. I need a personal loan in the amount of $20,000. At that moment, Janet Temple entered the office with a tray containing 2 glasses filled with ice cubes and a pitcher of lemonade. She poured the drinks and left. "I need a loan, but I don't have anything to provide as collateral," Mrs. Fuller said shamefacedly. "Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it," my brain ordered. "May I ask what you need the money for, Mrs. Fuller?" "It's for my grandson. He is finishing his last year of college, but something happened with his paperwork for his student loan. I told him I would try to pay his tuition until the problem with his documents was resolved." "How long do you need the money for?" I mentally sighed as I realized I was going to do it. "I can pay it off in a year, Troy. He'll sort out the paperwork on the other loan, and it'll be offset against your loan. Besides, he'll get the grant money and reimburse me. After he graduates, he'll have a good job, so there won't be a problem with the payments." "Is it for Paul? Your daughter's oldest boy? Do they still live in Seattle?" I asked, trying to remember Donna's son and the few times I had met him when they came to visit Mrs. Fuller. Then I remembered how I had been in love with Donna Fuller years ago, but that was just a youthful fantasy. I smiled regretfully, done with the past. I mentally estimated the payments as we continued to talk and asked her if she was comfortable with the monthly payments. She paused and asked what they would be for a year and a half. Not trusting myself 100%, I pulled out a calculator and gave her the result. She agreed that it was suitable, so I called Tom Jenkins in the loan department, told him the terms, and asked him to prepare the loan documents for Mrs. Fuller to sign. We spent the next 30 minutes reminiscing and drinking lemonade. I then escorted Mrs. Fuller to the loan department and assigned the very capable Tom Jenkins to take care of Mrs. Fuller. Mrs. Fuller insisted on kissing me on the cheek and said, "Thank you, Troy. You remind me of your father. There aren't many bankers giving unsecured credit these days." "Mrs. Fuller, your family has always cooperated with us. I know your word is strong enough," I assured an old family friend. "You just keep sending me tomatoes and maybe an apple pie?" I pleaded, and Mrs. Fuller laughed and said, "I'd have pie tomorrow." Back in my office, I found Janet Temple sorting tomatoes and separating the ripe red ones from the green ones. "What are you doing with my tomatoes?" I asked. "Troy, we're having BLT sandwiches for dinner tonight. Who is this we you speak of, Miss Temple?" I walked up behind her and pressed myself against her. She smiled. "By the way, Miss Temple, it wouldn't hurt to be a little more professional in the office." "Yes, Mr. Williams." She turned to face me and put her arm around my broad shoulders. "You gave her an unsecured loan, didn't you, and lowered the interest rate, so we're not actually making anything on this deal." "Yes, it is, Janet. That's Miss Temple for you, Troy." She corrected her feckless boss and kissed me again. "If you keep falling for every bad luck story, you won't last long in business." "If that happens, I'll just take my tomatoes and get a job somewhere." "Our tomatoes," Janet corrected, placing her hands on top of mine. "My tomatoes," I replied, gently stroking her cheek. Ours, mine, a quiet giggle came from my office. It turns out bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches were a daily specialty in my apartment that evening, and Janet Temple was a coveted dessert. As dawn broke, I woke up and bustled around getting ready for my morning run. Donning my running clothes, I kissed Janet on the top of her head, which made her smile as she stretched and woke up. "Why don't you go back to bed and work out here?" "Don't tempt me. Are you going to shower here or at your place?" "Why do you ask?" "Because I don't want to start taking a shower and get under ice water because you've already used it up," I explained. "I could wait for you and we could shower together," Janet suggested. I paused. She pouted sadly. "Well, I guess I better go home and get dressed for work." "When are you going to start leaving clothes here already, Janet?" I asked. "It'll make things easier." "Oh, Troy, let's not start that topic again. You go and have a great run, and I'll take a quick shower, and I'll see you at work." She kissed me and encouraged me to go for a run while she got ready to clean up. I prepared for my run by doing warm-ups and stretching exercises. I looked around my residence. Not many people can say they live in the same building they work in. Even fewer who live in a 3-story bank building that takes up an entire city block. As I do many mornings, I marveled at the Greco-Roman architectural style of granite stone and Doric columns rising majestically at the building's front entrance. My ancestor built the first permanent building in the fledgling city. He made a good study of the effect he wanted to produce. Prosperity and permanence were the safeguards that encouraged others to build. They exactly copied the architectural theme of the bank, and the entire town square epitomized wealth, employment, and industry. Or was, I thought sourly, looking at the ghostly buildings of the dilapidated town square. Now my bank remained the last bastion, the last reminder of a past that had brought so many regrets. As I ran, the calibrated pace broke the silence with only the sounds of my footsteps and breathing. I used this time as silence, a time for reflection and concentration. My first thought was about business, about Camden Bank and Trust. It was besieged by enemies, both from within and without. Ever since I took over as president of the bank, I had to remain vigilant every day. It was enough to make one wrong move, and all my hard work, and that of my father and previous generations, would be taken away from me. So many decisions to make, and no one to help me. Not for the first time, as I finished my run and walked up the stairs to my apartment on the 3rd floor, I felt completely alone. How I wished I could forget about all my problems. A shower and a quick rest would be enough. People depended on me. I undressed and stepped gingerly into the shower. In a few seconds, the hot water turned to cold splashes. Another grievance I'll have to express to Janet, I thought, as I hurried into the tub. At 9 in the morning, I would sit at my desk and work until official banking hours began. In fact, I had been working since 7 in the morning, preparing transactions on behalf of the bank. If all went well, it would go on like this all day. At 9:25, the intercom bell rang. "Mr. Williams, you have company." The strangeness in Janet's voice alerted my defenses. Why hadn't she informed me of the identity of these visitors? The little voice mentally told me that I should refuse the callers, referring to my busy work schedule, because of which I couldn't meet with the visitors today. Tell another employee to take care of any problem that might arise. Realizing that I had paused unnecessarily in answering Janet's call, I hesitantly told her to show the visitors into my office. The door opened, and Carla Robbins, Alimony, and Alina Ellen Porter, aka Bachman, entered. It was the first time I'd seen Alina up close in 6 years. The passing years had done her good. Her facial features had changed from their former angular beauty to a more rounded one. She had changed from a girl into a young woman in the prime of her life. "Hey, Troy," she tried desperately to catch my gaze. I knew she was trying to start a dialogue before the barricade started. In response, I waved my hand toward the chairs on their side of the table. Carla tried to hug me, but I was aware of my reluctance to make bodily contact with the three of them. If I refused Carla's hug, Alina couldn't take offense at the rejection. The three ladies quickly settled into their chairs. I sat down at my desk. "How are you, Carla, Ella, Mrs. Porter? What can I do for you ladies today?" Alina flinched at the cold politeness in my reply. There was no warmth in the greeting, no indication that the passage of time had created a willingness to forgive a past offense. She noticed that my gaze was fixed on the classmates accompanying her. "Please, Troy, I'm still Alina. I would appreciate it if you would call me by my first name." "I'll keep that in mind, Mrs. Porter." I asked again, "What can I do for you today?" "It's been 10 years since we graduated, Troy. We're on the reunion committee. We're trying to get new members on the committee and support the reunion." Ella took the lead in explaining the purpose of their visit. I was silent. Over the course of my career, I had learned that silence was a necessary and effective negotiating tool. Of course, this was not the usual business transaction I was used to, but the same principles applied. "Well, Troy?" asked Ella with desperation. "I'm sorry, Ella. I didn't hear anything that required me to comment." Ella sighed. "Why don't you help out and head up the committee, Troy?" A moment passed before I answered. "Ella, isn't it traditional for the president of the graduating class to head the reunion committee?" Ella's eyes widened with a hint of embarrassment. "Yes, but under the circumstances." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, giving her a moment to find her words. Alina spoke up, her voice softer than before. "Troy, we really need someone with your skills and leadership. You're well respected, and having you on the committee would mean a lot to everyone." I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "And what makes you think I want to be involved in something like this?" Alina's eyes pleaded with me, her voice trembling slightly. "Because despite everything that happened, you care about our community. You always have." I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and for a brief moment I felt a twinge of the old feelings I once had for her. But I quickly buried them, focusing on the task at hand. "All right," I said slowly, "I'll consider it, but I make no promises." The relief on their faces was palpable. "Thank you, Troy," Ella said, smiling warmly. "We really appreciate it." As they stood to leave, Alina lingered behind, looking at me with a mixture of hope and regret. "Thank you, Troy," she said softly. "It means a lot." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. As the door closed behind them, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The past had a way of creeping back into the present, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. But for now, I had work to do and a bank to run. Everything else would have to wait. Ella hesitated, realizing where the conversation was leading. "Yes, Troy, but—" "Refresh my memory, Carla." I turned to the woman I interrupted. "Who was our class president?" "Alex Porter." "That's right, Carla. I think you're talking to the wrong person." "Alex already said he wasn't going to be on the committee, Troy," Alina explained. I didn't give any indication that I heard Alina's comment or was going to respond to it. "We could really use your help, Troy." Carla offered. I understand, Carla, but since I won't be attending the reunion, I don't see the need to be on your committee. I pressed the intercom button. Miss Temple, please come in. I could tell that this restless trio was looking for a new mode of attack, for all three of them insisted that I must be present. Before I could comment, Janet Temple entered the office. Miss Temple, please escort our guests out of my office. I regret to inform you that I have an urgent matter, so you'll have to excuse me. Come on, Troy. You owe it to yourself to attend our classmate reunion, Carla insisted with the last of her strength. I turned my attention back to my three classmates. Before you all leave, I'd like to tell you a little story about what you owe people. I began sourly. A beautiful woman walks into a bar. Before she can sit down, a man appears in front of her. Madam, he says, for your information, I am one of the richest men in the world. I am so overwhelmed by your beauty that I am willing to pay you $10 million to spend 1 hour making love to you. At first, the woman was shocked by such an offer. Then she begins to think about what $10 million can buy. Okay, I will make love to you for $10 million, she replies. Then the man asked, will you sleep with me for $5? Now the woman is very upset by such an insult. $5? What do you take me for? She shouts to the man. We've already figured that out. Now we're just discussing the price. Do you understand the meaning of the word duty in this story? I asked my three classmates. Perhaps I can give you a better example. Imagine some poor dumb bastard thinks he's found the perfect woman for him, but he gets humiliated when she runs off with his best friend. What the hell do you think he's due? An opportunity to jump in and do her a favor when he sees her for the first time in years? There was dead silence and icy stares in response to the insults. I left my office through the back door, which saved me the awkward situation of shaking their hands. I heard Stacy's voice asking me to stop. Once again, I chose to ignore my traitor. I quickly climbed the stairs and paced the apartment. I continued to wander around the apartment. I systematically checked the views from the windows, hoping to spot the departure of the trio of classmates who had ambushed me. I heard the door open, and Janet's footsteps came toward me. I spun on my heels and hissed, Never, never, never do this to me again if you want to keep your job. Do you understand me? She recoiled in shock at the venomous note in my strained voice. I'm sorry, Troy. I didn't know how to feel about that, she replied with a dismissive apology. Well, you damn well better find another way. That woman never comes to me again. They didn't tell me who they were. They just said they were your schoolmates, she protested. I paused for a moment to calm down, but there was still awkwardness between us. Are they gone yet? I asked, looking out one of the windows. In my peripheral vision, I noticed Janet nod at my question. I could see that she almost cried at my abuse, but she nodded in agreement, not trusting her voice not to break into sobs. Time to get back to work, then. I roughly walked out of my apartment and headed downstairs to my office. Janet stayed in my apartment to clean up and fix her makeup before appearing at her desk. When closing time came, I was alone in my apartment all night. This trend continued for 2 weeks while Janet focused solely on her work and I on mine. On Thursday afternoon, just before closing time, Janet came into my office. With tears in her eyes, she asked me in a trembling voice, "Will you ever forgive me?" I walked over to her and hugged her as she started to cry. We went upstairs to my apartment, and I did my best to make up for all the pain I had caused her. By Friday morning, everything was back to normal. Saturday morning, we spent relaxing in my bed. We were talking into a pillow when she broached the subject. "Why do you hate her so much, Troy? Why can't you get over her?" she asked, drawing lazy circles on my chest with her fingernail. I knew who she meant. I decided to tell her it was none of her damn business. I sighed. "You moved here 4 years ago, Janet, so you don't know the whole story. I'll tell it to you once and only once, and I'll never discuss it with you again. Deal?" She looked at me with her big brown eyes and nodded seriously. "You know about her and me and how I made a complete ass of myself at prom by proposing to her. I know you must have heard that story 1,000 times in this town." Her look spoke the truth of my words. Even after 6 years, I was still ridiculed by the whole town. By this time, my act had become an urban legend, and it was endlessly discussed. You have to realize that we all grew up around each other, played with each other, went to school with each other. I paused, then banished the reluctance to say their names. Alex and Stacy have been my closest friends since kindergarten. Stacy insisted we play house with her, and we attended countless lunches with imaginary pies, cokes, cakes, ice cream, and candy. One day I would be a father and Alex would be our baby. The next day, Alex would be a father and I would be their child. Stacy, of course, was always the mother who dictated our actions. As we got older, Alex and I fell into that period of childhood where we thought all girls had STDs and avoided Stacy like the plague. Stacy took it hard at first, but then she moved on to hanging out with all her girlfriends. Alex and I were as close as brothers. We were at each other's houses every day, playing Little League Baseball or Boy Scouts or playing soccer. We always had something going on. As I began to remember, I realized that I couldn't help but smile weakly at the memory. But it was short-lived as I continued the story. We would still see each other. All of our parents socialized at the country club, at parties and charity events, and of course we were in the same class and had the same classes and teachers. Then middle school came, and something magical happened to all the girls. Puberty began to turn girls into fantastic creatures. Boobs began to appear and asses-filled skirts and pants. And like every teenager, well, at least every heterosexual teenager, we started lusting after these girls we'd been ignoring for years. But they weren't going to make life easy for any of us guys. So we had to jump through hoops, like carrying books for them, buying them cheap bracelets or rings, or letting them know that another boy was paying attention to us. That's exactly what happened to me and Alex. We started to see Stacy in a new light, and amazingly, we both wanted her. And even more of a surprise, we didn't want the other one to succeed. And the biggest surprise of all? Stacy decided she wanted Alex. You know, even at such an early age, being rejected was really hard. But I recovered. I started dating Alex and Stacy, but I also continued to be friends with them. It seemed like a perfect balance at first, until things began to unravel between Stacy and Alex. Their relationship hit a rough patch, with Alex cheating on her and openly dating other girls. This betrayal threw Stacy off balance, and just a week before prom, she came to me, asking if I would take her to the dance. I felt conflicted, so I went to Alex and told him about Stacy's request. Surprisingly, he said he was okay with it, assuring me he had no intentions of seeing her again. With his blessing, Stacy and I began to date, and before long, genuine feelings developed between us. I started doing more than just dating her. I helped her with her homework, washed her car, and did all sorts of little things to show I cared. I even made an effort to get to know her parents better, often convincing them to play a game of chess with me. Mr. Bachman, her father, would lecture about business and life, often throwing out phrases like, "In business, the big ones eat the little ones," or "do unto others before they do unto you." I would sit and listen, hoping to impress him. When college came around, Stacy knew I was determined to prepare for our future. We had talked about getting engaged and married long before, and she knew I would be ready as soon as we graduated. It wasn't a surprise for her. We had discussed our future extensively, even down to the kids we would have. She should have expected it. As I struggled to make sense of the situation, I remembered she had even picked out that damn ring. I commented on this to Janet, hoping she would understand. She nodded and patted my arm, giving me the courage to continue. I don't know when Alex came back into the picture. I had no idea Stacy and Alex were seeing each other again. If she had told me, maybe things would have been different. Maybe none of this would have happened. But I continued to see her every day at school and every weekend, completely oblivious to the fact that something was wrong. So here I am, standing in front of the whole world, feeling like the punchline of a cruel joke, with everyone laughing at me and gossiping about Stacy and Alex's Romeo and Juliet-style romance. I never really thought about how Stacy felt, but it was clear that she had made her choice. She ran away with Alex, giving the engagement ring to her parents as a graduation present and escaping to Europe with him. And just like that, my dreams and plans for the future crumbled, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my broken heart. They traveled to London, Paris, Rome, and Athens while I stayed in Camden, my heart ripped out of my chest. Every single day, I had to put on a brave face, go to work, and pretend that no one knew the humiliation I had endured. When Stacy and Alex returned home, they had a whirlwind wedding to dispel any rumors of their European affair. After the ceremony, they left the state to let the uproar die down. Charles Bachman, Stacy's father, secured them positions at one of his subsidiaries in California until the scandal cooled off. Meanwhile, Charles Bachman was furious with me for putting his daughter and family in the center of public ridicule. My dramatic prom proposal had caused far-reaching consequences. The town was divided on who to blame, but Bachman wasn't about to let anyone defame his precious daughter. He stormed into the bank where my dad and I worked, pointing fingers and laying all the blame on me. He declared that our town needed another bank to break what he called our stranglehold on the local economy. He closed all his accounts with us and invested his money in a new bank across town, Bachman's Savings Bank and Loans. My father tried to convince him otherwise, knowing this would create a severe financial rift for our bank. But Bachman was resolute. He moved his funds, and my father had to scramble to find alternative financing to keep the bank afloat. The pressure was relentless. Commercial lenders charged exorbitant rates, and my father had to accept unfavorable terms just to keep the doors open. It was a daily, hourly struggle. Bachman didn't stop there. He ensured that all employees of Bachman's Industries received their paychecks through accounts at his new bank. Employees were forced to open accounts for direct deposits, debit cards, and credit cards. Auto and home loans were offered at rates our bank couldn't match due to our financial struggles. Customers began leaving in droves. Bachman's ATMs popped up everywhere, and small businesses were persuaded to switch to his machines. He had us in a vice grip and wasn't letting go. He pressured all the local entrepreneurs to move their business to his bank, which they did, leading to the urban decline in the town square. It was a masterful, ruthless takeover. Charles Bachman had systematically dismantled our bank and taken over the town, all while ensuring his daughter and her new husband were far away from the fallout. And there I was, left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life, all because I dared to fall in love with Stacy. This led to a decline in bank traffic, and that meant we kept losing money. Every day, I fought side by side with my father, trying to atone for the mistake that had brought all this trouble upon us. I convinced my father to grant me access to some of the dwindling funds so I could trade stocks and engage in arbitrage to stop the bleeding. Fortunately, I found some success in that endeavor, but our losses continued to mount. My father, the president of the bank, was under immense pressure. Due to generational change, he had to report to relatives who started making a fuss, blaming him for their financial losses. Second and third cousins began filing lawsuits, hoping to gain an advantage and wrest control of the bank from him. Despite this, my father kept getting up and fighting every day, and I was right by his side. The stress, however, was too much for my mother. Charles Bachman succeeded in getting us expelled from the country club, and my mother lost her positions in all the charitable organizations. She was ostracized by the whole town. My mother, who had never hurt anyone, was torn apart by the vicious gossip. Her blood pressure spiked, and one day, my dad was called to the hospital. My mom had suffered a stroke. After that, my father was never the same. He handed over the day-to-day operations of the bank to me and focused on caring for my mom. I watched him take care of her, and only in his spare moments would we discuss bank matters. She lasted 2 months before she passed away. After that, my father became a shell of his former self. 3 weeks later, he suffered a heart attack. In less than a year, I lost everything I held dear, and now the responsibility of running the bank fell on my unprepared shoulders. I was looking for every penny I could find. Many people wanted to see me fail, especially Charles Bachman, who aimed to seize the bank's assets. The pressure was immense. The situation became so desperate that I had to sell both my parents' house and my own to support myself. I moved into the bank building, which had space available since all our tenants had moved to Bachman's building. I converted the space into a makeshift living area with a kitchen and bathroom, but everything else remained open space. I had to turn off the boiler to save on electricity, leaving me without hot showers. The building's only source of hot water was a regular domestic water heater. Now you understand why I live here, in this empty shell of a building with marble tiles and insufficient hot water. As for the daily struggles of the bank, you have an idea of what I went through. From my first days in charge, I fought to keep the bank afloat. I resorted to speculative trading and risky currency arbitrage, betting on minute-by-minute market fluctuations. I knew that if anyone discovered the bank's vulnerable position, they could bring us down. I had to offer loans to risky businesses that no other institution would touch. You know about the ledgers, how I presented false figures to show the bank as stable. But in reality, the true accounts revealed the depth of our trouble. If auditors got hold of these, I would be finished and end up in jail. That's why the Sorrent oil venture is so crucial to me. As you know, I've been working on this deal every day for the past 2 years. If I can pull it off, I'll be solvent again. I'll be able to pay off the bank and my creditors and stop robbing Peter to pay Paul. I'll be able to keep legitimate books and not worry about my head ending up on the chopping block. Information is power, Janet. That's why I have all these folders in my desk drawers. I have to stay ahead of whatever Charles Bachman is planning to do to end me. You think I enjoy keeping confidential files on him, Stacy and Alex? I do it to cover all bases. Imagine having to keep tabs on the woman who broke your heart and your once best friend. I hate it, but I have to. I finally paused, astonished at myself for broaching the subject with someone and feeling the psychological release after my confession. Janet looked at me with gratitude for opening up and trusting her. But Troy, she said, are you sure you can pull off this deal with Sorrent Oil? Aren't you afraid of dealing with a Siberian oil field? Janet, I replied, as I've explained, my French acquaintances have done everything possible to make this a reality. Once the oil wells penetrate the field, the oil will be refined at a new refinery on the coast of the Bering Sea. From there, tankers will transport the oil to ports on the west coast of the United States. The time difference and distance from Middle Eastern supplies will make it highly favorable. It's the closest to the truth it's ever been. The only downside is that many players are getting interested. Complete secrecy is impossible. Sorrent Oil's share price has been skyrocketing lately, so someone knows what it has in store. But I'm close to getting a controlling interest, and once I do, I can dictate terms, and success will be assured. I just have to stay in the game no matter how high the stock goes, I explained. Then I can be free of the Buckmans. I can buy out the rest of my pissed-off relatives, end all the litigation, put the bank on solid ground, and finally let Alex and Stacy go and start living my life again. I'm ready, Janet. I'm ready to commit to someone and live out the rest of my days. When I looked directly at her, she realized exactly what I was implying. Her eyes widened, and she caught her breath. The concept of time disappeared. The notion of anxiety was set aside. All that mattered was the primal need to connect with another being. Only for these fleeting moments could I forget everything in the world. So I tried to cherish them. It was already noon when we finally got out of bed, showered, and dressed. She told me she had to go to her mom's house for a sleepover. We arranged to meet on Sunday night. I spent some time texting some overseas friends online and then decided to go for an afternoon run. As soon as I went outside to do my warm-up and stretching, I saw her leaning against my battered pickup truck. As much as I wanted to avoid a confrontation, I decided it was best to go ahead and get it over with. As I approached, she got up from my truck. "Didn't think you'd be out today, Troy," she remarked. "What would you have done if I hadn't?" I asked. "I'd go back tomorrow and wait." "What if I don't show up tomorrow?" "Then I would come to your office and wait all day while you refuse to see me, and the whole town would have another laugh at our expense," she explained. "Well, then it's a good thing I'm here, so you won't be embarrassed in front of the whole town, isn't it?" I replied venomously. The rant shook her, but she continued nonetheless. "Troy, I just want to tell you that I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I hurt you. That was never my intention." She looked at me with pleading eyes. "For heaven's sake, Troy, you surprised me, and I panicked. You have no idea the pressure a proposal puts on a girl. I was put on display, and I was expected to give you an answer in front of the whole town?" I interrupted. "No, Alina, you're not getting off that easy. We've had all these discussions. You even showed me what kind of ring you wanted. So don't just stand there and tell me how I surprised and embarrassed you. I wasn't the one who ran out the door. Alex Porter chased me, I growled back. Yeah, Troy, I ran and Alex ran after me, and we turned out to be cowards and ran off to Europe together. But I was coming to my senses when I finally realized how screwed up I was. I went to my dad and told him I was coming back to you because I love you. He became furious and told me that I had already made him a laughingstock and that I would not be allowed to repeat that mistake by returning to you. He told me how he had publicly ended all personal and business dealings with your family and would not allow me to make a fool of him again. The next thing I knew, I was married to Alex and banished across the country until my father saw fit for us to return. My marriage was a mistake, Troy. Alex never loved me. He just liked the idea of being Charles Bachman's son-in-law. He thought it was some colossal joke to sneak up behind your back and play me. And after that night, he felt pressure to help me, but he never loved me, Troy. Otherwise, he wouldn't be chasing other women night after night. That's if he can get away from my father. Alex plays some huge psychological role in my dad's life because he has a son. And my dad absorbs everything, and nothing is too good for his son, Alex, she remarked wryly. Stacy closed her eyes and said, If I could somehow spare you this pain, I would. My act cost me the best friend I've ever had, and I'll never get him back. It cost me the man I loved most in the world. Even though I forced myself to remain cold and detached, inwardly, I reacted. I'd known this woman for most of my life. Surely she knew what buttons to push. Therefore, to protect myself, I had to respond harshly and push her out of my life. Yes, Alina, you can take the pain away from me. Just tell me how I get over losing you. Tell me how I survive losing both of my parents in the same month. Tell me how I survive day after day, despite your father and your husband's attempts to destroy me. Tell me how I survive being an outcast in society, being kicked out of the country club and all social organizations. Tell me how I can sleep normally without waking up from the nightmares you've given me. The fierce questioning at a rapid pace threw Stacy back, and I saw tears come to her eyes. I knew I had to escape or be forever damned in my desire to possess her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll go for a run and forget about you again. Barely containing herself, she nodded, and I turned away from her and began to prepare for my first step. I almost tripped when she sobbed. Okay, Troy, I made an effort, and now I'm going to live with the consequences. One last thing, I'd like you to reconsider your decision not to go to the reunion tonight. You still have plenty of friends among our classmates who would love to see you, and for those who don't, your presence will prove that you are not a coward. I pretended I hadn't heard her last remark and began my run. The last untainted thing in my life, the zen of running, was now absent. I had barely gone a mile before I stopped on a bench in a city park and, hidden from view, began to cry. I realized that if I lived to be 100 years old, Stacy would still haunt me. I stayed there for the rest of the day, trying to decide what to do. I looked up at the imposing country club building. Nothing symbolized the exclusivity of the entire city like it. Only the rich and powerful were admitted here. The rest of us were forbidden entry. But on special occasions, such as high school reunions, the minorities, the oppressed, and the downtrodden who never had their standing were given a brief glimpse into a way of life they would never know. I walked past a few classmates admiring the splendor of the surroundings and nodded to them. Even though I had been banished from this view 6 years ago, it no longer held my interest. Down an immaculate hallway with plush carpeting, decorative vases, and landscape paintings, all the trappings of grandeur led to the banquet room. At the entrance was the obligatory table emblazoned with the Camden High Tigers logo. Behind it sat my classmate Alimony, whom I'd last seen in my office, trying to talk me into working the reunion. Her eyes widened at my approach. Troy Williams, I announced to her, as if I had to remind her who I was. I didn't check in, so I guess I'll have to pay a late fee, won't I, Ella? Taking the money from me, she said embarrassedly, It'll only take a minute, Troy. She started typing rapidly on the laptop. I stood aside while Ella worked with the other classmates who had pre-registered. They were given name badges with a picture of the graduates and their past accomplishments. They were then handed gift bags and allowed to proceed to the banquet hall. Some classmates said hello to me, some ignored me, but the hallway still had an uncomfortable atmosphere. The laptop printer finally spit out my makeshift badge, and Ella slid it into a flimsy plastic holder, which was very different from the finished laminated badges waiting on the table to be picked up. I pinned the badge to my shirt, took the gift bag Ella had offered me, and lazily peered into it, looking at the various cheap trinkets inside. Finding nothing I couldn't live without, I placed the bag on a pile of similar bags dumped by the trash can and entered the banquet hall. Maybe it was due to my heightened paranoia, but I sensed a decrease in the volume of conversation as I entered the room. Not wanting to confirm my fears, I headed toward the bar. I hastily paid $10 for an overpriced gin and tonic cocktail. After tasting the drink, I was almost tempted to return it because of the cheap gin. Instead, I walked away, holding my drink like a shield to avoid engaging in conversation with anyone. This only alienated most of my classmates. Some continued to chat with me, and despite the awkward first comments, I was beginning to enjoy being with a crowd of old friends when Alex and Stacy entered the room. Alex was dressed in a business suit to distinguish himself from the others. For this evening, a casual form of dress was chosen. From the very beginning, he was eager to show his superiority by looking down on everyone. His aloof demeanor suited Charles Bachman's protege. Stacy, on the other hand, was wearing a simple black dress and was immediately mobbed by her classmates, insisting that she join them on the dance floor to take part in the electric slide. I watched as Alex tried to object, but she ignored him and took center stage on the floor. The simple pleasure of doing the dance moves attracted several other classmates to join her and enjoy the music. As soon as the song ended, she turned back to Alex, and I saw him make a remark that she obviously didn't like. Another song started playing, and Stacy tried to pull Alex onto the dance floor. He resisted until she finally gave up. She stayed by his side, just watching the dance until her girlfriends dragged her onto the floor again. For the rest of the evening, there was a strange dichotomy: a passive Stacy next to Alex and an animated, relaxed Stacy dancing on the dance floor. But never with a guy. Whenever anyone approached Stacy, he would ask Alex for permission to dance with his wife. He always stubbornly objected until the guy left. As the dance went on, Stacy became increasingly embarrassed by his behavior. With each refusal from Alex, the argument became more explicit and more insistent. Fortunately for Stacy, her friends kept coming over to give her a chance to relax on the floor. Her dancing on the floor pleased every man in the room, and I suspect there were quite a few women among them who would have been ready to come out of the closet if only Stacy had beckoned them. Still, she faithfully returned to Alex after each dance, her face reflecting her growing displeasure. She begged him to dance with her, but apparently, the titans of industry are not allowed to have fun. Their irritation became more and more apparent, and there were fewer and fewer people willing to dance with Stacy as they were afraid of escalating the argument. At that moment, Stacy looked down at the floor and caught my gaze. Without asking permission, she left Alex and walked across the floor to me. All eyes were on us as she held out her hand and said, "Dance with me." Avid's face could have been seriously injured by his stare. Shit, I had nothing to lose. I followed Stacy, who continued to hold my hand, leading me toward the floor. "I thought you said you weren't coming to the reunion," she said with a sly smile. I replied, "Not until they told me what a big ass I would be if I didn't come." Stacy giggled at my reaction as the intro to the slow dance number began. Her eyes widened as she feared I would reject the idea of body contact with her. Instead, I shrugged and opened my arms, assuming a dance pose. She stepped toward me. I wrapped my arms around her, and we started swaying to a slow ballad that had been popular 10 years ago when we were seniors in high school. I felt her hand move up my arm. Then she moved even closer to me, and we continued to twirl slowly among our classmates on the crowded, darkened dance floor. I could smell her shampoo, her soap, and her perfume. It overwhelmed my sense of smell. All those heady, desirable scents were pushing me closer and closer to the point of no return. I closed my eyes and enjoyed the fantasies in my head as we continued our dance. I was lost in my own world of contentment. Those few minutes made it bearable, made me believe. Suddenly, I realized that the music had stopped. The lights were burning brightly for a quick dance, and I was still doing the dance steps with Stacy, deep in reverie, in full view of everyone, including Alex. Out of place again, in public. There was loud laughter from the side. Fred Carter was on one knee, pantomiming a proposal, his outstretched hand holding an imaginary ring, and the people around him were laughing. I quickly pulled away from Stacy and rushed over to him. He quickly stood up from his defenseless position and looked concerned as I walked toward him. The laughter died down as I got closer. The DJ must have wanted to see what would happen next because no song came on after the slow song. Fred Carter, now co-owner of the Ford dealership in town with his father, my classmate, the guy I played on the high school soccer team with, turned pale, anticipating me beating the crap out of him in front of his wife, our friends, and classmates. He even flinched when I stopped next to him. I looked at the chubby, balding man and compared him to the man he'd been 10 years ago. The future did not bode well for Fred Carter. I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Sophomore year, Fred, do you remember the night you, your mother, and your older sister came to my house? Fred's eyes widened, and I realized he wanted to beg me to keep quiet. Your mother howled in pain, and so did you and your sister. Do you remember what she told my father, Fred? Do you remember how she told him about your father's drinking? Remember how she told my father how he was squandering all the money your family had by getting drunk? Remember how she begged my father to help you all? Do you remember what my father did? Do you remember how he came to your house, picked up your drunken father, and drove him to a rehab center 150 miles from home that night? Do you remember how my mother insisted that your family stay with us for that week? Do you remember crying yourself to sleep in my room that night, Fred? Do you remember when my father opened a line of credit for your mother so your family could survive while your father dried out? Do you remember when my parents came to your house with groceries so you'd have something to eat? And that's after he hooked up your utilities again. Do you remember how my father restructured your father's business loan so he wouldn't go into default and my father wouldn't take the business away from him? Do you remember how my father made sure your father attended AA after he was released from the program? Remember when you and your father came back one night and swore that you would do anything for us as a token of eternal gratitude? Remember the day your heartless father sent you to withdraw money from the Buckman's accounts? Do you remember how ashamed you felt for such treachery? Remember how my father treated you with dignity and respect? Remember that the next time you decide to insult me, you son of a bitch, I said bitterly. I looked around the crowd. I see at least 8 other people here tonight who would have a similar story to tell, but I'm going to let you all go because honestly, none of you are worth the trouble. I ventured, looking at them with blazing eyes. No one could catch my gaze. I turned and walked toward the exit. At least no one would ever forget our 10th reunion. Walking quickly across the parking lot, I heard the tempo of high heels clacking 3 times behind each step I took in an attempt to catch up with me. I didn't need to explain who was chasing me. The continuation of this story will be on your screen or in the description below the video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel.